everybody, welcome to the County Seat. I'm your host, Chad Booth. Today we are going to talk about renewable energy communities. Now, a bill was passed in the legislature this last session that has become law and allows and helps foster the creation of 100% renewable energy communities, counties, and different organizations. So we're going to look at that bill today, and then we're going to have a conversation about one county that has taken up the gauntlet to become 100% renewable energy. So let's start with a little bit of the basics about renewable energy.
The electricity we use on a daily basis rarely requires more than a flick of a switch. The lights, AC, TV, whatever, it turns on. But what if you wanted to make sure the power you are using is being produced exclusively by renewable energy?
And that's a really exciting thing we have showcased here at the Richens building in Summit County. The solar on the roof provides electricity to the building. The electric vehicle chargers, we have electric buses. We showcase kind of the future of transportation, all powered by solar right here at one location.
Now you currently do have options like adding solar to your home, but what can you do if you'd like your entire community to run on 100% renewable energy? Well, there are some new solutions available, and a growing number of communities in Utah plan to meet the 100% renewable goal by 2030. Cities and counties who choose to move towards this goal before the end of this year now have the ability to create resolutions to become 100% net renewable by 2030, thanks to the Utah legislature and House Bill 411, the Community Renewable Energy Act.
We worked with Rocky Mountain Power over the years and our partners, Park City and Salt Lake City, to figure out what would be a good way forward for the whole community and the utility to keep everybody whole and keep it fair and make it widely available, make renewable energy widely available. So this has been a long time coming. The actual legislation was written in about the last 6 months prior to the start of the session, legislative session. And that was just a lot of working out all the details of how the process could work, and again, how to keep the utility whole, how to not impact other ratepayers, and how to get good pricing for the participants.
Becoming a net 100% renewable community is made up of several steps to keep the process transparent for ratepayers of the utility. The process begins with interest from the community. From there, the local government will begin working with the utility to get a projected price estimate for each customer. The local government looks at that information and decides whether they want to adopt an ordinance. The utility would then supply the community with a more accurate price, which will show up on your bill indicating what is currently being paid and the difference in that cost when you switch to renewable energy sources. Then there is an opportunity for people in the community to either stay with the new renewable plan or to opt out. Once the utility knows who is participating, they send out an actual cost to procure renewable power, and that's what people will pay. Now, some of you are probably wondering what 100% net renewable really means and how that would be separated from the rest of the sources on the grid.
So that means that in a given year, an entity uses a total of how many, 100,000 kilowatt hours. So they would purchase the 100,000 kilowatt hours of renewable energy, because obviously the sun's not shining, the wind's not blowing all the time. So you aggregate the total amount used and you purchase the total amount from this renewable asset.
While you still can't point to the exact source of power your home is using at any given time, what this legislation provides is a way for entire communities to say, we want renewable energy. The utility company is able to use that information as they retire aging assets on the grid and plan what they will invest in building next.
It gives the utility a direction. It will assist in them investing in those assets that they will recoup some of their costs from. So as I see it, it pushes them along a path a little bit sooner than they would have probably otherwise gone. And we meet our goals in the timeline that we desired. For the first time ever, really, they have a choice in the electricity. I mean, currently the utility says, here's the rate, here's what you get, and you take the electricity. People now have a choice, and they can make that choice, and then the impact of this choice, the emissions reduction associated with a large number of people, entire communities going renewable, will have a significant impact on air quality and then indirectly on climate change.
Thanks, Maggie Kay, for that report. We will be back to continue this conversation on the county seat in just a minute.
Exploring is an innate part of being human. What if there was a place on Earth that explores your sense of touch, sound, breath, sight, all year long? So take your time and make it monumental. San Juan County, Utah's Canyon Country, is the place to explore your sense of adventure.
Mountains to explore. Adventure to be had. A town to fall in love with. Yes, all that in Park City, Utah. Start your adventure at visitparkcity.com.
You know, we're folks bound by traditions. Whether it's holiday time or vacation time, make sure that one of your traditions is a stop at the Creamery in Beaver, Utah. Delicious cheese direct from the factory, ice cream, tasty treats, crafts, and gifts of all kinds. And it's the perfect place to get a bowl of creamy mac and cheese. Start your new tradition the next time you're headed our way. The Creamery in Beaver, Utah. Farm, meet table. Welcome back to the county seat. Our topic today is how do you build a 100% renewable energy community? Well, we are going to have a conversation about one county that's taken that challenge up or thrown down that gauntlet, depending upon how you put it, and what it takes to make that goal happen. So joining us for our conversation today is Chris Parker, who is the Director of the Utah Department of Public Utilities. Thanks for joining us, Chris. Glenn Wright, a commissioner from Summit County, who is the county that's working towards becoming totally renewable energy by 2030, and Spencer Hall, who is a spokesman for Rocky Mountain Power, who has to make sure that they're able to produce enough 100% renewable energy for Summit County. Okay. So thank you all for coming to the show and joining us for this conversation. I think probably it would help just to talk a little bit about what exactly is a net renewable, 100% net renewable energy, because that doesn't mean that you're only taking electrical sources that are directly generated from renewable energy. Would you like to?
Yeah, that's correct, Chad. What it means is simply, for instance, if you use 1,000 kilowatt hours of power a month in your house. Mm-hmm. Somewhere in the state, 1,000 kilowatt hours of renewable energy will be generated over that period of time, or over a period of a year.
Or within Rocky Mountain Power's?
Within Rocky Mountain Power's jurisdiction. So whatever your usage is over a period of a year, somewhere in the Rocky Mountain Power system, that will be generated for you.
Now, this all came about as a result of, I believe it's House Bill 411?
Correct.
So, how did that bill come about? I mean, you guys were all, I'm sure, involved in the passage of this bill. So what was the genesis of it, and what were the obstacles?
Yeah, it was really a very long-term process. And I think I wasn't even involved in the very initial stage of it, but it was probably about a 3-year process with Rocky Mountain Power, Salt Lake City, Park City, and then Summit County came in a little bit later. Went to Rocky Mountain Power and said, we would really like to have 100% renewable electrical. energy. And getting to a meeting of the minds and figuring out how it would work for all of our communities and for Rocky Mountain Power was the key to those discussions. And those discussions went right up to this legislative session, because we didn't get the final bill written until 2 weeks before the end of the session.
If that. Right.
So I guess this is a question for you, Chris. Somebody would look at this and go, well, if you decide you just want all renewable power generation, why not just say we're going to have all renewable power generation? Why did we have to create legislation to get there?
Yeah, so the way the utility system works right now, of course, you have the monopoly utility provider, Rocky Mountain Power, and its job is to do least cost, least risk planning for its whole territory. And what that means is often lumpy investments, right? You need capacity, you build a coal plant or you build a gas plant or whatever. And so over the years, you accumulate this portfolio of assets that serves the need that you have. Of course, over time, things change. You end up with declining loads or flatlining loads that you thought would be growing. You end up with different customer preferences. And that's what's really happened here is over time, customers have said, hey, wait a second, I'm willing to pay a little bit more for the product that I want. But the problems that, and they're problems that aren't insurmountable, that it creates is all of that stuff that was built to serve that load has to be paid for. And if you're building new stuff to serve customers with 100% renewable energy, they've still got to cover the costs of the things that were originally built for them in the first place.
So it's almost like public finance. You bond to build a certain amount of power capacity, and that is paid for by the customers over a period of time. So we're still paying for sources of energy that in the future communities like Salt Lake County and Summit County and Park City don't want to be paying for. And so how do you solve that problem as a for-profit company?
Yeah, so we want to power our customers' greatness. That's our motto, and that's what we do. And as the regulated utility, we have that obligation. But we also have the obligation to keep costs down, the least cost, least risk. And so it is a lot like that. We've bought a house, and now times have changed. We want a different house. But anybody who's run a household and owns a business or something, you know that if you have to pay for something, you can't just say, oh, I want to go live in this other house. It's not that simple. We'd all like to live in a brand new, nicer home, but we also have to make sure that we don't shift the costs to the most vulnerable people.
So how did the legislation change that? What did that fix?
So one of the things that's key from a regulator's perspective, my division's charged with the broad public interest, which means safe, adequate, reliable service at reasonable rates. Mm-hmm. And what happens if you let people jump when they want to jump is you leave all of these stranded costs, right? So the legislation was necessary to set who's responsible for which set of costs. And in fact, it says that these communities that participate in a 100% renewable goal, they can't shift costs to other customers. Now, it could go the other way, right? If these new resources are super cheap and more people want to jump into them, you get left with fewer and fewer people paying those old costs. So there has to be a mechanism to cover those while allowing that transition. And that's really what all of this stuff is about, even nationwide, is there's this transition happening. And nobody's building new coal plants, but that transition has to be managed well. And so the legislation was necessary to kind of lay down those markers for the Public Service Commission about who was ultimately responsible for what.
And it keeps the folks who opt in to pay their part. Some people, Summit County, Park City, Salt Lake City, they've decided that their constituents and as leaders, they want to move toward this goal. And the hard part was making sure that it, like Chris was saying, that it doesn't cause other people to pay more who maybe haven't opted into that. So that becomes a complicated equation that we had to work out with the different stakeholders. How do we do this and allow people to opt out if they don't want to be part of it? And we've made an obligation as Rocky Mountain Power. We've made a fixed rate obligation to, or a commitment to our customers. And so we've said we're not raising rates. And so that makes it complicated too. This would be easy if we wanted to just go out and raise rates. We can do that. But to keep rates down, it made it a little more complicated.
To put it in perspective,
yeah,
I pay about 11.5 cents a kilowatt hour over my base bill in Summit County. About 1 cent of that, roughly, is the continuing cost for generation assets. About 6 cents is the distribution cost, and the other 4 cents is primarily operations, maintenance, and fuel. So we're going to have to continue to pay that 1 cent. But the new assets will replace the operations, maintenance, and fuel costs. But getting all that worked out in the bill and in the regulatory process is what caused 3 years of negotiations.
Okay, so what I think would be a good and clear point to make, though, is that if you live in Wasatch County and you're just across the street from you who live in Summit County, does that mean your rates are going to be different because Wasatch County is not participating in this and Summit County is?
So Wasatch County is a municipal utility, so they're definitely not participating.
Okay. But the example stands.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So would that make a rate difference?
Absolutely. And in fact, within the same community, for customers who opt out of this plan versus the ones who remain in, they'll have a rate difference as well. And that's part of why another reason why we needed legislation, because currently the code forbids rate discrimination like that. So this is a willing choice by folks to say, yeah, I'm going to pay more for the organic tomato, as former Senator Madsen used the analogy of.
And that's the example. A lot of our customers have come to us and said, look, I am willing to pay more. And especially some of the leadership that's been shown in Park City, Summit County, and Salt Lake City, areas that have a little more affluence and a little more opportunity to do this, they've said, we're going to show some leadership, we're going to put our money where our mouth is, and we're going to push this forward, because it really does create the pathway that other groups can follow. But it took a group being willing to say, you know, we understand this might cost us more in the short term.
But to be correct, Glenn, that would mean that your community basically came to you as a council member and said, this is kind of what we want. Yeah. So it wasn't driven by a leadership decision to say, well, we're going to strike out this direction. It was more constituent.
There was really a community consensus on it. We had several public meetings and discussions in the county council on this subject, and we didn't get one negative comment on it in any parts of the county, both east and west.
Excellent. Well, I think we've got kind of a handle on how this came to be. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back to the county seat, we'll delve into what this looks like on the ground and going forward. And we'll be right back with the county seat.
There are meetings, and then there are gatherings. At the Davis Conference Center, we know the difference. Turn your event into something more than just another business summit. With over 70,000 square feet of flexible meeting space, state-of-the-art presentation amenities, and inspiring architecture, the Davis Conference Center is designed to deliver stellar results in a majestic setting. Take your convention to the next level. Schedule now at davisconferencecenter.com.
149 million years in the making, dinosaurs once roamed this land. Now they're found at the Dinosaur National Monument. Let's take you beyond the bones. We call it Dinosaur Land. You'll find it offers adventures and sights not seen anywhere else in the world. Come to Dinosaur Land, Vernal, Utah. You'll want to stay forever. The dinosaurs did.
In our world, the sun shines on high adventure, and new experiences are yours for the taking. And everything in you looking to play outside the box. Cedar City, it's time to play.
Welcome back to the county seat, talking about renewable energy communities and the goal to go 100%. Summit County's taken that on, and they've set a 10-year deadline to try and get the portfolio providing electricity that they use to becoming all from renewable. Why 10 years?
Why 10 years? I think part of it is the threat of climate change, but also the possibility of the Olympics coming to Utah. and the selling point to the IOC that these next Olympics could be a carbon neutral event.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. But 10 years, some people may think, well, why does it take so long? And some people say, can you do it that fast?
That's pretty quick.
Yeah, that is very quick. I mean, we're looking around the country, and this is actually one of the most forward-looking renewable goals in the country. So what's being done with this legislation and with Salt Lake City, Park City, Summit County is really some of the most aggressive renewable goals for cities and communities. And as the partner with Rocky Mountain Power, we want to get there. We recognize that that is a big goal. Having the Olympic Games come again with the venues already in place and some of those upgrades, being able to go out and say, not only do we have this great place, we're going to be working on some of the clean air issues, and we'll be able to provide an all renewable games. I think it's a really compelling story, and as the power provider, we want to get there for them.
So would that be an overwhelming thing to say, I've got 2 years to take an entire county and possibly 2 or 3 and have them all be on a...
Probably impossible.
Yeah, I mean, the situation you face, and you know, Governor Herbert's been very forward thinking about, one of his 4 cornerstones is energy and energy development, and he's fond of saying, hey, we're all of the above here. And one of the things that he and his Office of Energy Development and his energy advisor, Dr. Lara Nelson, have been working on is these permitting processes for all these things. Because when you want to build a lot of renewable energy, first you have to find the place that's suitable for it, right? You have to find a place with good solar or good wind potential, and then you got to figure out how to connect it into the existing transmission network, which takes a lot of miles of wire, and it takes a lot of permits from a lot of different agencies. You know out west better than a lot of people how much federal land there is and the length of time that permitting takes for that. Rocky Mountain Power has been working for well over a decade on its Energy Gateway projects collectively and permitting those throughout its 6-state territory, and it's a really heavy lift. So 10 years in bite-sized pieces as it comes is fairly aggressive without being unreasonable from my perspective.
And I think from a state standpoint, it'll benefit the state, not just the participating cities and counties, because there's kind of been a paradigm shift in the cost of electricity. Renewables are continually going down, and will soon, in many places, be cheaper than fossil-based fuels.
You did raise an interesting point, Glenn, is that you were talking about a lot of that investment of that 11 cents per kilowatt hour going to fuel and upkeep of combustion facilities, where that could be transferred over to paying for the higher cost of the technology.
Right.
Well, I was going to say that's really the attractive part about renewables is once you've got the investment in there, the fuel costs are zero. Wind is free, the sun is free, and so if we can solve the reliability question, how do we keep the lights on when the sun isn't shining and when the wind isn't blowing, then we can really provide an interesting portfolio. So it is right now a mix. And I think technology is growing quickly. The prices are changing, and it's being driven by economics. But it is an interesting energy future that we're working on.
I can be the buzzkill regulator for just a second and say that we still don't have a clue really what it costs to backstop renewable energy when renewable energy forms the bulk of our system. Right now, we get a lot of renewable energy on the cheap coming out of California when they're over-generating, and that's been a great thing for Utah's customers. But what we don't know is how much of what you need to backstop that. And of course, you know, battery technology is evolving. There are all of these things that we think are close but aren't here yet, so we don't know what they cost. So things like this can be a useful experiment in that.
And that's the benefit of doing it over a 10-year period. I think we'll see some of those backstops develop over the next 10 years. Well,
your goal becomes only 10% a year, but the one question that does come up, and I know that if I don't ask this, somebody else is going to ask me, why didn't you ask that? But there's a life expectancy. The solar panels, you know, they wear out. They have to be replaced. Batteries wear out. Is that a calculable cost?
Absolutely. That's all part of our integrated resource planning that we're working on right now. We'll file our 2019 plan in August. We're working with the commission. But yeah, the life of a project, we're doing it in Wyoming right now. We're calling it repowering. So we have windmills there. Some of them were built around, you know, the turn of the century. And we can put longer blades on them and do some things that make them more efficient, put different generators on them. And so that's all part of, you know, you can't drive a car forever, you can't drive a plant forever, and no matter what kind of plant it is, you have to understand that there's going to be some investment at some point. And so we take all of those things into account, and then we work with the commission to make sure that we are doing it in a prudent fashion so that we're not putting undue burden on the customers and providing that reliable power.
Well, we've taken a whole bunch of time. There are a million more questions, but I do want to take a commercial break and leave some time for people to find out how other communities can participate in this. We'll be right back with the County Seat.
There's a little place on a Utah map where I was raised, where my heart's at, where the sagebrush grows wild and high, and the stars come out at night. Oh, there ain't nothing like being raised in the basin with a Ute reservation, skiing starvation, that Duchesne County life.
All the traveling that I've done over the world, I'd still rate this locale as being one of the best.
This is some of the most scenic country out there. And part of the appeal for Kanab is it's a small town. It's beautiful. People are very friendly.
It's just been awe-inspiring.
You just couldn't find a nicer place to come.
Welcome back to the County Seat. We're talking about a goal to be 100% renewable in 10 years for some of the communities here in the state of Utah. So if people in other communities who are not Salt Lake City, who are not Park City, who are not Summit County think, boy, this is something that we'd like to have some dialogue on, how do they do it?
First thing they do is the councils in those, or commissions in those entities, have to pass a 100% renewable energy goal by 2030. That gets them into the program.
But by the end of the year.
By the end of the year.
Yeah. By the end of this coming year.
By the end of this year.
Okay. Are you inviting them to call you for details if they've got people in their community that are asking?
I would be happy to talk to anybody who's interested.
All right. We'll give out Glenn's phone number here in just a few minutes. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us for this conversation. We probably need to revisit this again. Remember, local government and local communities are where your life happens, so be involved, be part of it, and we'll see you next week on the County Seat.